A military plane crash should unite a community. It should call forth compassion, urgency, and neighborly instinct. But the moment that C-130 Hercules hit my back pasture, the only thing that took flight in my town was a certain woman's ambition. A plane just crashed. Karen? I said, barely able to process the smoke rising from the twisted metal. But Karen Whitaker, our 52-year-old HOA president, wasn't looking at the fire. She was looking at me like she had just found a reason to finish what she'd started years ago. "This is unacceptable," she shrieked, marching toward my workshop like the crash had been scheduled just to annoy her afternoon tea. I stood there, still stunned, hands blackened from grease and sweat, heart thudding from the roar that had nearly shattered my roof. But instead of checking on me, instead of asking if anyone was hurt, she pulled out her phone and started dialing 911. "This is a clear violation of HOA regulations," she barked. "Aircraft are not permitted on residential property." That was the moment I knew I wasn't dealing with a woman out of touch. I was dealing with a woman on a mission. See, I've lived on that ranch for 30 years, built my auto repair shop with my own hands, raised horses, fixed trucks, shared barbecue with neighbors. My wife Sarah and I dreamed of nothing more than living quietly and dying peacefully on that land. She's been gone 5 years now. Cancer. But the ranch remains my sanctuary, my home, my history, and Karen Whitaker had always hated that. Hated that a grease monkey owned 10 acres while she squeezed her manicured empire into a half-acre colonial. She called my barn an eyesore, my gravel driveway a liability, and my annual 4th of July cookout an unauthorized gathering. But this crash, it gave her something more. It gave her a narrative. 15 minutes later, Deputy Mike Torres pulled into the driveway. Mike and I go back 40 years, played football together, shared beers when our kids left for college. He took one look at the wrecked plane, then at Karen, who had already gathered 2 HOA board members at the edge of my property like it was a battlefield. "Mike," she began, her voice syrupy and laced with righteousness. "This man is endangering our community. I demand he be arrested." Mike sighed. I saw his shoulders slump, the same way they always did when dealing with her. Like gravity itself got heavier. "Karen, this is clearly a military emergency," he said. "Tom didn't cause this." And just like that, an Air Force officer stepped in. "Ma'am," he said sternly, "this site is now under federal jurisdiction. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Karen didn't budge. "This is HOA property. I have rights," she snapped. But she left. Not quietly, not gracefully. She left with venom in her eyes and a promise on her lips. "This isn't over, Harland." By sunset, she'd sent out a neighborhood-wide email with the subject line, "Urgent safety hazard at Harland property." She called me a danger to the community. Blamed me for the crash. Never mind the Air Force reports. Never mind the mechanical failure. To Karen, this was proof that my land was a threat, a nuisance, and possibly conveniently available for sale. You ever watch people turn on you without ever looking you in the eye? That next morning at the coffee shop, the same folks who used to wave from across the parking lot suddenly kept their heads down. Moms who brought their kids to my garage for career day whispered behind paper cups. Nobody said anything outright. That's Karen's real power. She poisons the well and lets you die of thirst. I called Mike. "She's got the mayor's ear," he said, his voice low. "And she's stirring things up downtown. But the military says you're in the clear." But in the clear doesn't mean safe. It means I wasn't going to jail. Yet, later that afternoon, I walked the crash site. The Air Force had cordoned off the area with caution tape and station guards. But something felt off. Tire tracks that didn't match military vehicles. A strange sheen on one piece of fuselage. That evening, Karen came strutting down my driveway again, this time holding a letter on official HOA letterhead. "You've been fined $5,000 for creating a public nuisance," she said, handing me the paper like it was a wedding invitation. "This is just the beginning. Section 23 states all property owners are responsible for activities on their land. You'll be lucky if you get to keep your little garage by the time this is over." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "We already have interested buyers lined up." She turned to leave, but not before tossing one last line over her shoulder like a curse. "Be careful with that crash site. We wouldn't want any more accidents." It was a threat, wrapped in a warning, cloaked as concern. The next morning, Major Leia Harrison from the Air Force showed up on my porch. She was all business, sharp uniform, clipped tone. "Mr. Harland, we're beginning a thorough investigation," she said. I offered her coffee. She accepted. "Have your guards noticed any unusual activity?" I asked. Her brow furrowed. "Actually, yes. Last night someone tried to bring in a civilian cleanup crew. Claimed they had owner's permission." I shook my head. "I didn't authorize anything." Her expression hardened. "Any interference with a military crash site is a federal offense." I didn't have proof, but I had a damn good guess who was behind it. I called Rusty Jenkins, an old friend and former Air Force pilot who lives 2 doors down. Over mugs of strong coffee and stronger suspicion, I laid it all out. He nodded gravely. "If she's tampering with that site, she's crossing a federal line." He leaned back. "And I've heard whispers. Karen's been talking to developers. Folks interested in your land." That night, I stood by the fence, the crash site still glowing faintly in the dark. Smoke and secrets hung in the air. I got a text from Mike. "Karen's at City Hall claiming you operate an illegal airfield." I chuckled, but the humor didn't reach my chest. She was escalating. I wasn't just a neighbor she disliked anymore. I was an obstacle, and obstacles in her mind were meant to be removed. I had no illusions. I was 63 years old, not some Hollywood underdog. I wasn't looking for a fight, but I'd be damned if I let a petty tyrant weaponize bureaucracy to rob me of everything Sarah and I built. She wanted a war? Fine. She picked the wrong ranch. And deep down, I knew something she didn't. The military doesn't forget. The feds don't ignore. And when power is abused in the light of day, when a crash becomes a cover for greed, it's not just a personal feud anymore. It's a matter of national concern. Karen Whitaker thought she could hijack a tragedy for her own gain. But the wreckage in my pasture wasn't just twisted metal. It was the beginning of the end for her. And I was just getting started. It started with tire tracks, deep, deliberate ones running right through the military cordon around the crash site. They weren't from the Humvees or utility trucks the Air Force had parked out there. I knew the pattern. I've been repairing vehicles since I was 20. These were civilian tires. Wide, smooth, fresh. Someone had been out there during the night, and they hadn't come for a tour. Major Harrison didn't say much when I pointed them out the next morning, but her eyes narrowed and her team added an extra layer of fencing. I could tell something was shifting. The military was starting to take Karen seriously, just not in the way she hoped. That same afternoon, I found a certified letter stuck in my front gate. Another gem from the HOA. This one wasn't just a fine. It was a formal declaration of intent. The board had voted to pursue legal action against me for creating a persistent hazard, reducing neighborhood property values, and operating without proper HOA compliance. Karen had even included a clause stating they could initiate a forced sale if I failed to resolve the issue within 30 days. She'd gone from annoying to predatory. I stood there in the hot sun, reading the letter with my hands trembling. Not from fear, but from rage. This wasn't just about my land anymore. It was about principle. About not letting a bureaucratic bully rewrite the rules just because she wore a tailored blazer and had friends in real estate. I called Mike again. "She's escalating." I told him, my voice low. "They're talking about forced sale now." He cursed under his breath. "Damn it, Tom. She's pushing every button." I could hear the exhaustion in his voice. "I've been looking into her dealings. There's something weird with the HOA's finances. But it's hard to prove." "Keep digging," I said. "I'll handle her the old-fashioned way for now." He laughed softly. "What, pitchforks and torches?" "No," I said. "Evidence." Later that day, I took a walk down to the edge of the crash site again, just to clear my head. I wasn't expecting visitors. But then I saw her, Karen, standing outside the perimeter tape. She wasn't alone. 2 men stood beside her, Tall, clean-cut, wearing boots too polished for real work. They were pointing, gesturing to areas on the ground like surveyors. One of them held a clipboard. When they noticed me watching, they got quiet fast. Karen gave me that same plastic smile she always used in public meetings. "Just ensuring community safety, Tom," she said. "You understand." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Her presence there said everything. She was planning something. I didn't have to wait long to find out what. The next morning, a city inspector showed up at my shop. Said he was responding to an anonymous complaint about unsafe commercial operations on residential property. Claimed I was running an unauthorized aircraft facility due to the crash. I nearly laughed in his face. "It was a military emergency," I said. "The plane crash wasn't scheduled." He didn't smile. Took photos. Scribbled notes. Warned me I might be shut down. And standing just outside my fence, arms crossed, was Karen. Watching. Smiling like a predator who'd just tasted blood. By now, I couldn't sit still. I was too angry. Too wired. So I did what I do best. I got to work. Pulled out old HOA meeting minutes. Cross-referenced them with public real estate filings. Called in a few favors from buddies who worked in land management. And piece by piece, a pattern started forming. Karen had been quietly pushing new ordinances through the HOA for years. Things about community redevelopment, zoning flexibility, and increased oversight. Buried in technical language, but they all pointed toward one goal: making it easier to reclassify and sell private lots like mine. Rusty dropped by that evening with news that nearly made me spill my coffee. "Karen's been collecting payments," he said, sliding a USB drive across my kitchen table. "From a company called Pinnacle Development. Monthly. Regular as clockwork. Labeled as consulting." I opened the files. Bank records, spreadsheets, internal memos. And there it was. My name. My address. Targeted in a document titled Acquisition Strategy Phase 1. I felt sick. This wasn't just Karen being Karen. This was a planned operation. And the plane crash, whatever its cause, had given her the leverage she needed to execute it. She wasn't just trying to push me out. She was trying to sell me off. Literally. The next HOA meeting was a circus. People showed up in droves, some angry, some confused, most just scared. Karen stood at the podium like a senator, flipping through slides showing aerial shots of my property with big red warning labels. "Harlan's property poses a significant risk," she declared. "We must act swiftly to protect our neighborhood." Then came her motion. Force the sale of my ranch to cover legal costs and safety upgrades. I stood up slowly, looked every neighbor in the eye before I spoke. "Karen," I said, loud and clear, "how did you know about the crash site before the military even secured it? Why did your people try to sneak in cleanup crews the same night?" A hush fell over the room. Karen blinked. Once, twice. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, a little too quickly. "Really?" I pulled out my phone, played the video I'd captured, her voice on tape, talking about contaminating the site to justify seizure. Gasps rippled through the room. Janet Williams, another board member, stood up. "Karen," she said slowly, "were you planning to use this crash to force people out?" Karen tried to deflect, denied everything, but the seed was planted. The vote was tabled. The meeting ended in chaos. And Karen, flushed, furious, cornered me on the way out. "You've won nothing," she hissed. "I will bury you." But that night, something changed. Neighbors started texting, apologizing, asking questions, offering help. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't alone. But Karen wasn't done. She doubled down, filed new complaints, sent more inspectors, even tried to freeze my business bank account through a zoning loophole. My shop was bleeding money. Sandra, my assistant, cried in the break room. "Tom, I don't know how much longer we can hold on." I knew the feeling, but I also knew giving up would mean letting her win. Then came the turning point. Major Harrison called. Her voice was calm, but serious. "Tom, we've discovered tampering at the crash site. Deliberate movement of debris. And some kind of environmental agent introduced post-impact. My heart pounded. You think it was Karen? We don't think, she said. We know. We have footage. I sat down hard. So what happens now? Now, she said, it becomes federal. And just like that, the woman who thought she could bully, manipulate, and strong-arm her way into someone else's land had stepped into the ring with the U.S. government. She had no idea what she'd started. But I did. This was no longer just about my ranch. This was about drawing a line and refusing to be moved. The day after Major Harrison confirmed the tampering at the crash site, I knew we were entering a different kind of battle. The type that doesn't play out with raised voices or slamming gavels, but with sealed envelopes, silent money trails, and threats whispered behind closed doors. Karen had officially crossed a federal line. And yet, as I sipped my morning coffee on the porch and watched the sun rise over the blackened patch of earth where that C-130 had fallen, I knew the real damage was just beginning, not to the land, but to everything I'd spent decades building. The first punch came before noon. My business line rang off the hook, not with customers but with cancellations. Fleet contracts I'd held for years were abruptly terminated. Legal concerns, they said. Negative publicity. Sandra came into the office holding a stack of appointment slips, her face pale. We've lost 2/3 of next week, she whispered. I walked out to the shop floor, empty except for the sound of my own boots. Karen's shadow was everywhere. Her lies, her poison, her connections. She didn't need to win in court. She was going to choke me out before I ever got there. That afternoon, I met Major Harrison and Rusty at my kitchen table. We spread out everything, bank statements, footage, emails Rusty had intercepted. Harrison had brought her own folder. We found something odd, she said. The debris wasn't just tampered with randomly. Someone was looking for something specific. She showed us photos, pieces shifted just enough to alter the crash narrative. Whoever did this knew exactly where to look. They weren't just trying to bury evidence. They were trying to build a new story. Rusty leaned forward. You think Karen knew? Harrison nodded slowly. We think she had access to aircraft maintenance schedules. The plane that crashed was serviced just 2 weeks before. And the contractor. She slid a document across the table. Pinnacle Aerospace Maintenance. A subsidiary of Pinnacle Development. Felt like ice water down my spine. Karen wasn't just involved in a land grab. She was in bed with the very people responsible for that plane's upkeep. If she'd known there were safety issues and pushed to profit off a crash, then we weren't talking about HOA overreach anymore. We were talking about endangering military lives for a real estate deal. We needed to strike back, but carefully. I asked Mike to look into Karen's financial activities within the HOA. Harrison drafted a statement confirming I was fully cooperating with the federal investigation. Rusty kept digging into Pinnacle's contracts. Meanwhile, I documented everything. Every inspector, every violation, every late-night coincidence that happened to disadvantage me. I wasn't just building a defense. I was laying a trap. 2 days later, the HOA held a financial review meeting. The community showed up in force. Part angry, part curious, part ashamed they'd believed Karen so easily. But the mood shifted when Robert Hayes, a retired accountant and longtime board member, called the meeting to order, not Karen. We're here to review spending, he announced. Karen tried to interrupt. I think we should address Mr. Harlan's property. No, Robert said firmly. The agenda is financial review. For the next hour, we tore open the books, and what we found was damning. Karen, Robert said, holding up a printout. These payments, $15,000 over 6 months, were deposited directly into your personal account. Where's the board approval? Karen's face twitched. Those were for community outreach special projects. Funny, I said, standing up, because those payments line up perfectly with deposits from Pinnacle Development. I distributed copies of the documents, emails, bank transfers, memos marked confidential that Rusty had managed to pull from Pinnacle's own servers. Then I played the video. Karen, standing at the edge of the crash site, whispering to a contractor, "Make sure your report shows contamination, whatever it takes." The room erupted. Janet Williams, once one of Karen's closest allies, stood up and stared at her like she was a stranger. "You're planning fraud," she said. Karen tried to talk, but it was too late. The vote passed. Almost unanimous. No confidence. Full forensic audit. Karen slipped out during the chaos, phone clutched to her ear like a lifeline. I didn't follow her. I didn't have to. The walls were closing in. But she wasn't finished. The very next morning, I was served with a lawsuit, defamation. She wanted $200,000 and a public retraction. My lawyer called within an hour. "Their offer," he said dryly, "is to drop everything if you agree to sell to Pinnacle within 30 days. My hand clenched the phone. "That's extortion." "Exactly," he said, "which is why we're not taking it." That evening, I spotted two men walking the edge of my fence line. Not military, not neighbors. One held a camera. The other carried a drone case. I called Major Harrison. She arrived within 20 minutes. "They're documenting something," she said, "probably trying to build a false environmental report." She filed a formal complaint. We added the footage to the evidence stack. But still, the attacks kept coming. My shop was hit with graffiti. "Dangerous owner. HOA terrorist." Teenagers, probably, but someone had sent them. And then came the media storm. Karen's lawyer called a press conference. They positioned her as a victim, a patriotic woman targeted by a rogue neighbor and corrupt officials. They edited footage to make it look like I'd threatened her. They claimed I faked the documents. Claimed Major Harrison was abusing her position. Claimed the military had overstepped. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I held a press conference of my own. We presented full videos, uncropped. We showed timelines. Harrison stood beside me, in uniform, unshaken. "Our investigation remains ongoing," she said, "but the evidence thus far indicates deliberate interference with a federal crash site and collusion to manipulate property outcomes." Public opinion shifted again. Slowly, people started asking questions about Karen, about Pinnacle, about how a military tragedy had become a neighborhood political war. But Karen still had allies. She filed complaints against Mike, claiming he'd harassed her during inspections. She lobbied the city council to revoke my business license. She even tried to contact members of Congress, accusing me of conspiring with the military for personal gain. That's when the FBI called. Not about me, about her. "Mr. Harland," the agent said over the phone, "we believe Ms. Whitaker has engaged in activity that may constitute violations of the Espionage Act." My blood went cold. Espionage. "Yes," he said. "We've traced data flows from her IP address to multiple military contractor networks. She may have been gathering intelligence under the guise of HOA activity. Whether she fully understood the implications or not, she transmitted restricted materials." I sat there, staring at my wall, at Sarah's photo, at the life we built, and I realized something. Karen Whitaker didn't just want my land. She wanted power, influence, control, and she'd do anything, steal, lie, even risk national security to get it. But in chasing power, she forgot one thing. Eventually, it turns around and bites. And when it does, you better not be standing in front of a freight train like the United States government. The day after the FBI confirmed Karen was under investigation for potential espionage, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt hollow, like I was standing in the eye of a storm too big to comprehend. It wasn't just a neighborhood dispute anymore. It wasn't just some power-hungry HOA president. It was a full-blown national security case. And somehow, a simple man with a garage full of busted engines and a field full of burnt grass had become the central witness. I didn't ask for this fight, but I wasn't going to run from it either. Not after what Karen had done, not just to me, but to our community. Still, as I stood at my shop counter that morning watching two new inspectors circle my business like buzzards, I realized Karen's influence was far from over. They didn't find anything substantial, just a missing safety label and a frayed extension cord. But that didn't matter. They wrote me up anyway. Fix it in 48 hours or face suspension. That wasn't regulation. That was pressure. And I knew damn well where it was coming from. I called Mike. They're trying to kill my shop from the inside, I said. He sighed. I've been pulled from the case officially. Karen filed a complaint with the sheriff's office. They're reviewing my past reports, trying to paint me as biased. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. We both knew what was happening. Karen's network, whoever was left of it, was circling the wagons. And despite being one step from a federal prison cell, she was still pulling strings, still playing puppet master. That night I couldn't sleep. The stress had begun to eat away at everything. My appetite, my business, my peace. Even Sandra quit that morning. She came into the office with red eyes. My son got into a fight at school, she whispered. They said I work for a terrorist. My heart broke for her. I told her to take time off, but we both knew she wouldn't be coming back. Later that afternoon, Major Harrison and Patricia Mitchell showed up at my place. Harrison looked grim. Mitchell was holding a manila folder thicker than a dictionary. Tom, Mitchell began. They've submitted a new piece of evidence in court. I raised an eyebrow. Let me guess. Another deepfake. She nodded. It's video this time. Supposedly you, meeting with unidentified individuals at the crash site. Exchanging envelopes. I laughed. A dry, humorless thing. Let me guess. High definition, perfect lighting, all very cinematic? Too cinematic, Mitchell said. Our forensics team is analyzing it, but their expert claims it's real. I felt like someone kicked me in the gut. I wasn't there. I was home. All night. We know, Harrison said, but your security footage from that night has been wiped. Clean. Static only. My legs buckled slightly. That's not possible. That system's encrypted. Not anymore, she said. They had access. Somehow. The next day in court, the footage played for the judge. It looked real. Too real. Even I had to admit, if I hadn't lived it, I might have believed it. Karen sat across the courtroom, dressed in gray, hands folded like a church lady. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes were full of fire. That fire that said, I'm still playing, and I still intend to win. I had to do something. Fast. That night, I sat with Rusty on my porch, nursing warm coffee and colder thoughts. You know, he said quietly, she's not doing this alone. I nodded. No way in hell she pulls off fake videos and court-level sabotage with just HOA funds. He tapped his phone. I've been watching Pinnacle's internal comms. They're panicking. You and your land, there's more at stake than development. They were promised access, possibly military leverage. Karen was their broker. She was logging flight paths, logging personnel visits. You weren't just a target. You were a vulnerability. The word made me sick. Vulnerability. That's what I'd become to these people. Not a man. Not a citizen. Just a piece on a board. That's when Mitchell called with a wild plan. We need to trap them. Get it all on tape. The pressure, the bribery, the blackmail. If we can catch Pinnacle red-handed, we can unravel the whole thing. I agreed. What choice did I have? I wore a wire. Met with 2 Pinnacle executives in a hotel suite downtown. They were slick. All smiles and soft words. We believe in community improvement, one said, sliding a folder across the table. Inside, a contract. $750,000 for my land. Plus a non-disclosure agreement. You'll never work again if you refuse, the other murmured. But if you sign, we make all your problems go away. I leaned back. And the federal charges? They smiled like wolves. We have friends in high places. This doesn't have to be messy. It was all recorded. Every word. 3 days later, the courtroom was different. Karen's lawyers were on their heels. The FBI had joined the prosecution. Mitchell played the tapes. The entire room listened as the Pinnacle team laid bare their plan. Manipulate the crash investigation. Use Karen as a front. Discredit me with deep fakes. And acquire my land by force or fear. Then came the witness nobody expected. Danny Morrison, a technician from Pinnacle Aerospace, took the stand. Nervous, sweaty, but solid. Karen paid me for maintenance data, he admitted. She said it was for safety reports. But then she asked about vulnerabilities, fuel leaks, timing schedules, crash scenarios. Karen exploded. "He's lying," she shouted. "This is all lies." But the jury wasn't buying it anymore. The next few days were a blur of depositions, cross-examinations, and testimony. Every time Karen's team tried to spin the narrative, we knocked it down with hard evidence. Emails, recordings, financial trails. And then, like a rotting house under pressure, her whole defense collapsed. Turned out she hadn't just worked with Pinnacle. She'd funneled HOA funds into a secret account used for bribes, falsified property reports, and even tried to plant contaminated soil at the crash site to invoke federal seizure. The court ruled in our favor. The deepfakes were exposed. The financial documents proven forged. Karen's remaining supporters left in silence. And when the final charge was read, attempted espionage, Karen didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just sat there, hollowed out, a queen with no kingdom, staring down 25 years in a federal penitentiary. That night, I returned to the spot where it all started. The grass was growing back. The fence had been repaired. The burn marks were fading. And for the first time in months, the air didn't feel heavy. I thought about Sarah, about how she'd always said justice was like planting seeds. You don't always see it grow right away. But when it blooms, it's strong. And it lasts. I wasn't free yet. Karen's PR firm was still pushing stories. Her lawyers were still filing appeals. But the tide had turned. My neighbors were coming back. My business was slowly rebuilding. And I, just a stubborn old mechanic with a battered ranch and a fight he never asked for, had survived. I lit a fire in the pit behind my garage and tossed in the last of Karen's fake legal notices. One by one, they turned to ash. One by one, her lies lost their grip. As the flames flickered against the dark, I raised a glass of bourbon to the stars and said, "For every man they thought they could bully, this one didn't bend." The months that followed Karen's conviction moved like molasses in January. Slow, thick with tension, and stubbornly clinging to everything in my life. The court had ruled, the evidence was irrefutable, and yet her shadow still clung to the community like smoke after a barn fire. You'd think after bringing down a crooked HOA president, exposing a multi-state development conspiracy, and helping the feds sniff out a near-espionage network, I'd catch a break. But what they don't tell you about winning a war is that the cleanup takes just as much grit. My repair shop still carried the stain of her campaign. Some customers came back, most didn't. Not yet, anyway. And the ones that did, they'd glance over their shoulders like they were checking if Karen's ghost would show up with a clipboard and a noise complaint. Couldn't blame them. The woman might have been in a federal prison, but her lies had taken root deep. They'd poisoned our soil, our trust, our peace. Fixing that wasn't going to happen overnight. Still, I got up every morning, opened my shop, took care of the land Sarah and I had bled for. Because when you've lost everything and still choose to stand, that's when the bastards know they didn't break you. Then came the first real sign of life. Janet Williams, now our new HOA president, knocked on my shop door carrying a peach pie and a tentative smile. "The board," she said, "would like to host a community dinner at your place to rebuild what she tore apart." I stared at her for a moment, letting the silence settle. "You sure they're ready?" She nodded. "Whether they are or not, we have to try." So we did. 1 month later, my field, once the site of a crashed military aircraft, became the site of something just as rare: honest neighborly connection. Folks brought folding chairs, homemade casseroles, even a few guitars. No speeches, no rules, just people trying to remember how to live together. I saw old Mr. Henderson laughing with kids. The Pattersons brought deviled eggs and sat next to the Martins, who they hadn't spoken to in 3 years. And for the first time in a long time, I heard music not marred by tension but lifted by relief. It was small, but it was something. Of course, peace never comes without a price. A week later, I got a certified letter from Karen's legal team. Even from behind bars, she was stirring the pot. Pending appeal, defamation, harassment, emotional distress. All dressed up legal jargon meant to say, "I'm not done with you. I sat with Rusty on the porch, rereading the letter under the soft whir of a ceiling fan. "She's got nothing left," he muttered. "Just trying to keep a finger in the game." I didn't disagree, but the audacity still burned. So I made a call. Not to my lawyer, not to the press, but to Mike. "Let's go public. All of it. The wire, the documents, the tapes." He hesitated. "You sure? That's throwing gas on the ashes." "Exactly," I said. "Let her try to fight ghosts. We fight with truth." We held the press conference at the town library. Symbolic, I thought, to speak truth where knowledge lives. Local reporters, a few regional outlets, even a retired Navy vet with a YouTube channel showed up. I laid it all out. The conspiracy, the targeting, the frame jobs. Major Harrison stood beside me and spoke clear as a bell, confirming every detail. Mr. Harlan's cooperation prevented a national security breach. He didn't just defend his land. He defended our institutions. And with that, the narrative shifted. Finally, overnight, the tide of opinion began to turn. Emails poured in. Veterans groups offered support. Local officials who'd kept silent before now issued statements of regret. And the most unexpected moment came when the Department of Defense sent a commendation letter to my home. I read it 3 times before calling Sandra. "Come back," I said. "It's safe now." She returned the next day, tears in her eyes, her son in tow. "He wants to learn engines," she whispered. I handed the boy a wrench. "We'll start with a carburetor." But just as the air began to clear, a new threat arrived. Pinnacle's umbrella corporation had filed for reorganization. Translation: the players hadn't left. They just changed jerseys. A new company, Civic Path Holdings, had appeared overnight and already begun lobbying in neighboring counties. Rusty's tracking software flagged it immediately. Same executives, same playbook, different logo. "They're gonna try again," he said. "Maybe not here, maybe not now, but they don't give up. People like that just mutate." I knew he was right, so I partnered with Patricia Mitchell and a team of federal advisors. We started a watchdog initiative, HOA Reform Now, exposing corrupt board practices, teaching communities how to spot coercion, how to audit budgets, how to protect their land. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about armor. If they came again, they wouldn't find us sleeping. Meanwhile, back home, life began to bloom in strange and beautiful ways. The old crash site became a community garden. The kids planted tomatoes. The adults built benches. And once, during a late afternoon cleanup, I found a note under a freshly turned stone. "Thank you for fighting for us. We were afraid." You weren't. No name, just a signature, a neighbor. I kept that note in my toolbox, right next to Sarah's photo. Because some days it's not the court victories or the medals that remind you who you are. It's the quiet gratitude of people who saw you bleed and chose to believe anyway. Then came the letter. Not from Karen, not from the state, but from the U.S. Senate. An invitation. They wanted me to testify at a hearing on HOA abuse and private land rights. I flew to D.C., wearing my only suit, shoes shined by a kid down the block who wanted to help, the hero mechanic. I sat in front of senators, cameras, policy wonks, and I told them the truth. That power unchecked turns neighborhoods into fiefdoms. That fear makes people follow tyrants in beige suits and fake smiles. That one plane crash, one small man standing his ground, had exposed something rotten hiding in plain sight. I ended my testimony with a line I hadn't planned but meant from the bottom of my soul. If you want to fix this country, don't start at the top. Start in the cul-de-sac. The room was silent. Then someone clapped. Then more. Not applause for glory, but recognition of truth. When I got home, there was a sign on my porch, handmade, painted with care. "Welcome back, Tom. We're proud of you." And underneath it, a cooler of cold beer and a tray of ribs. I don't know who left it. I didn't need to. I sat there, looking out over my land, the sunset brushing the sky in that old cowboy orange, and finally let the weight roll off my shoulders. Karen was gone. The networks exposed. The community healed. But I knew this vigilance never sleeps. The wolves might retreat, but they always circle back. And when they did, they'd find me waiting, not alone, but with a town that had learned to fight back. With neighbors who now knew that HOA didn't have to mean tyranny, that it could mean unity, fairness, shared strength. We'd been tested by fire, but we came out tempered, together, still stubborn, still standing, and damn proud of it.